welcome to Jim Creates. In this video, I'm going to show you the process that I use to carve a spoon from wood. And that process pretty much always starts with selecting a piece of wood. And for today's project, I actually just went out to the wood pile and grabbed the first piece of poplar that I could find and I brought it inside. And then I proceeded to split it with an axe down to a more manageable size and square up the edges so that it would sit in my vise a little better and hold on. Round pieces of stock just slide around in a vise. So it's always better to square up the edges. You want to be careful doing this with an axe, even though it goes very fast. Things can go very wrong very fast when using an axe. Now the tools I'm going to use today are fairly simple. I'm going to use, as you see, the axe, a spoke shave, a draw knife, carving knife, gouges, and I tried using a tool that you may not be familiar with, and that is a hoof knife, and that's used for trimming horses' feet. It's incredibly sharp, but unfortunately it's much better designed for carving horses' feet than it is for wood, as you will see pretty soon here. Now, why am I carving a spoon? I've carved a lot of things over the years, but the spoon is a special object for me. And it represents in my mind the indomitable spirit of one man's determination to push the limits and to live in harmony with the wilderness and himself. And that man is Dick Proenneke. Now, Richard Proenneke was born on May 4th, 1916 in Primrose, Iowa. In his early years, he worked on local farms, fixing equipment and doing chores until America entered World War II. In fact, he enlisted in the U.S. Navy the day after the attacks on Pearl Harbor and served nearly 2 years as a carpenter at that same naval base. Later, he was stationed in San Francisco and, following a hike in the surrounding hills, contracted rheumatic fever and was hospitalized for 6 months, during which time the war ended and he was medically discharged. The illness reportedly spurred Proenneke to devote the remainder of his life to his health and body, according to biographer Sam Keith. Now, switching back to the spoon for a second, you can see this is that hoof knife I was talking about. And although it's wicked sharp and very able to cut through this wood, it's just not doing the job that I was hoping it would. And so you'll see in a moment here I switch to basically what is a palm gouge, as used for carving small, minute objects. This is more of a finish gouge, but it's all I have. If I had a larger gouge, I would use it. I don't. And so I switched to this palm gouge, and it actually did a really admirable job of carving this spoon. Now, following the war, Dick Proenneke worked his way north to Alaska, applying his trades as a diesel mechanic, a sheep rancher, and a heavy equipment operator, when he eventually ended up working for the Fish and Wildlife Service of Alaska as a technician and salmon fisherman. On May 21st, 1968, at the age of 51, he arrived at Twin Lakes, Alaska, the place where he would live most of the next 30 years of his life alone in a cabin that he built by hand. Though he is not the first person by any measure to build a cabin, it is remarkable that he did so by himself and with such great precision, and filmed the entire process using an 8mm wind-up camera and a tripod. The footage that he shot at times is breathtaking, and luckily for us, he did not stop rolling after the cabin was built. Much of his efforts leading up to the cabin are chronicled as well, including the methods that he used to fashion tools and utensils in the wilderness and his methods for transporting his building supplies across Twin Lakes by canoe. He took time also to record the changing of the seasons and the local plant and wildlife, and after the completion of his cabin, he kept filming his day-to-day for years. The footage of his first year is highlighted in the film Alone in the Wilderness, a Bob Swear production, and if you have not seen this film, I highly recommend it. You can see with the gouge here, I am just working my way around the bowl of the spoon, cutting one way and then the next, and meeting in the middle, and trying my best to leave a smooth cut in the bottom, because that will save me a lot of time later when I am finishing the spoon with sandpaper. A few minutes with the gouge is worth hours with sandpaper, so try to get the bottom of that spoon as smooth as you possibly can. Now, when I watched Alone in the Wilderness as a young man, I was amazed at the self-reliance of Dick Proenneke, and at one point in the movie, He claims that he is in need of a spoon, and instead of ordering one and having it delivered by airplane, he just very matter-of-factly makes the spoon and his other kitchen utensils out of wood in a couple of hours. And that is why I chose to carve a spoon for you today. It firmly plants my feet on both sides of the line between civilization and natural self-reliance, and it helps me touch a deeper understanding of what it means to be a human. Now you can see here with the saw, I am just going to cut down to the lines on the handle and a little bit around the top of the spoon where the bowl of the spoon is. And I'm doing that to make stopping cuts because eventually here, as you'll see, I'm going to use the axe to just remove as much material as fast as I can, and it will make my job a lot easier. And basically when you're carving, you're just removing anything that isn't a spoon. The spoon is inside the piece of wood, and you're going to remove everything else that is not spoon. And speaking of spoons, Dick Proenneke's handmade spoon symbolizes an awakening in myself and the interconnectedness of mankind. To me, it symbolizes our capacity to learn and develop skills and create objects that are intrinsically human. And I encourage you then to learn more about Dick Proenneke and enjoy this video and try your hand at carving a spoon. You can always go buy a spoon, but you can't buy the satisfaction of learning a new skill or creating a beautiful and functional object. Alright, as you can see, I have the axe here and I am just chipping away everything that is not spoon. And those stopping cuts are preventing the axe from going far too deep into the wood. And they're also stopping me from removing the bowl of the spoon. Now you can see I switched over to a draw knife. We're back in the vise. And the best way I've found to use a draw knife is to use a sort of a sliding motion. It slices through the wood grain instead of just pulling it off. Because if you try to just pull, it'll go really deep into the wood and it will just catch. And you'll end up popping the wood grain completely off. And that is not always what you want to do. And you can see I flipped this around and you'll get a good idea of why I did these stopping cuts now, is because when I'm going back towards the bowl of the spoon with the draw knife, it will only go so far until the grain of the wood has been severed by the saw. The draw knife will not create what's called a run, which is where the grain separates and just splits completely off of the piece. If I hadn't done those stopping cuts, I could end up with a run that would just tear the bowl of the spoon in half, and that would totally defeat the purpose of doing this. I'd end up with a butter knife or a fork or something like that, and I'm trying to make a spoon. Here, I'm on the back side of the bowl of the spoon, and I'm just going to make stopping cuts that go down towards the bowl of the spoon. They stop short, well short of the bowl. But once again, this is just so that I can take the axe and remove material very quickly. And you'll see that here in just a minute. I'm also doing these stopping cuts on the back side of the handle because obviously I want the handle of my spoon to be somewhat more slender than that. And the quickest way to remove material is with a large, sharp object, and then in this case being an axe. Now, if you're going to use this method, you must be very careful because the hand that is steadying the object that you are cutting with the axe, you have to be mindful of where that is. And if you accidentally hit it or it gets between the axe and the object you're trying to cut, well, you are going to cut your hand, and you do not want to do that. Like I said before, the larger and sharper an object and the more power it has behind it, the faster it will cut, and that includes your skin. It does not care. It doesn't care about your skin. It doesn't care about your bones. You're in charge of it. Yeah, I was just trying to find the best angle here. I didn't really want to cut on the concrete floor, but for the purposes of filming, it was the best option. Now back in the vise here, I used a coping saw to just sort of round off the edges of the bowl of the spoon. And I did this to all four corners on that bowl of the spoon. Once again, the faster you can remove material or the rougher you are with it, the faster it goes. But you do have to be somewhat mindful of where your edges are and leave yourself enough margin so that when you're finishing or carving with the hand tools, or knives I should say, that you're not leaving yourself too little material. It's best to go a little wide and leave yourself a little more finish work with the knife than it is to cut right down to the edge with the saw and then mess things up. Yep, you can see now I'm cutting back towards the handle, being mindful of a steady margin all the way around the bowl of the spoon. Now I will say this whole process does not take very long. I know it's sped up and I've used quite a bit of jump cuts to speed up the process even more. But in real life, I think the spoon took 2 to 2.5 hours to carve, and it would have gone a lot faster, obviously, had I used power tools. But in the spirit of Dick Proenneke, I wanted to use hand tools. He did not have access to power tools. So now you can see this object I'm using is called a spoke shave. It's basically a tiny plane with a rounded shoe on the bottom instead of a very flat shoe like you would see on a jack plane or a finish plane. And that allows you to basically carve a round object. It's not perfectly round. It is still faceted because the blade is flat in the spoke shave. But it allows you to work both with the grain and against the grain. And it creates, like I say, a rounded handle or a rounded object. They were used by wheelwrights to create spokes in wheels, thus the name, spoke shave. So a lot of this process is using the spoke shave, using the draw knife to try to refine the shape. And like I said before, remove anything that's not a spoon. There's a little better look at this tool. As with any other tools, you want to keep your blades sharp. Dull blades are dangerous. They cause you to use excessive force when you're pushing them through the wood grain. And if you end up using excessive force, the tool will eventually split the grain open and everything will slip forward or backward or whichever way you're pushing. It'll just go all at once, and it can end up cutting into you, cutting into people around you. You can slip and go into a part of the project you don't want to carve. So it seems counterintuitive, but the sharper your tools are, the safer it is. It's much safer to have incredibly sharp tools because they will cut with precision and you will not have to use as much force. Yep, back to the spoke shave after I used that draw knife to sort of rough out the shape a little more. Now we're going to refine it a little bit and just see where we're ending up. Now, if you'd like to learn more about Dick Proenneke, you can certainly do that by going on the internet. Also, I will leave some affiliate links in the description of this video to an Amazon store that you'll be able to find his books. There are several books, I believe, that he wrote, and I believe they are mostly his journals of his time out in the wilderness. He spent 30 years out there, and I think it was at the age of 81 or 82, he ended up leaving Alaska forever, went back to California, and lived out the rest of his days there. The Alaska Fish and Game and National Parks have control of his cabin at the moment. He donated it to them, and it stands as a museum. So you can actually go visit the site on Twin Lakes where Dick Proenneke lived. And hopefully someday I'll be able to make that trip. I would love to go see it in person. And you can kind of see our spoon is taking a little better shape. There's still a long ways to go here, but perseverance and just, patience, perseverance. Try to think about your next move. Plan your carving strategically. And remove anything that is not a spoon. You can see I was working with the gouge, but it's not a very powerful tool. It's somewhat dainty, and it requires, for these larger pieces, quite a bit of force, and that's just not something that I want to do because the tool can slip and I can hurt myself. So I switched back to a draw knife. Draw knife is actually a very safe tool to use because as you're pulling it towards yourself, and I know that sounds dumb, why would you want to pull a knife towards yourself? But as you're pulling the draw knife towards yourself, your elbows can only go so far back, and it's almost impossible to cut your stomach or chest or anywhere else with the draw knife. The only way you could really get in a lot of trouble fast with a draw knife is if your legs were up by the knife blade. And as you can see there, my legs are nowhere near the knife blade. But if you have your legs between your chest and your knife and it slips, you could cut into your leg. So just be mindful of where your limbs are when you're using these sharp tools. You can see that was a big chip that I just took out there, and that's when I was talking about making a run in the grain. That is what I was talking about, and I wanted to make sure that I hadn't gone too far down into the bowl of the spoon and create a thin spot, which I had not. I have quite a ways to go yet, so I was lucky that time. Here I'm just feeling how close to the bowl of the spoon I'm getting on the back side and making a decision about how much more wood I want to carve off. You can see I'm still refining the shape and trying to figure out the thickness of my spoon. And I'm kind of doing everything on the fly. Every single spoon that I carve or every single object I carve is unique. It's different. The piece of wood that you use is going to be unique from piece to piece. And so every project will have its own little quirks. You have to be slow and methodical and think about what's going to happen next and try to plan your moves. Well, it appears that I have the spoon down to a point to where I'm going to start refining the shape with an actual carving knife. And I got started on that and pretty quickly abandoned it. There was a lot more material there than it looked in the vise. And so I did a little bit of carving by hand here and pretty quickly put it back in the vise and used the draw knife to refine the shape a lot more before I then finished it with the hand carving knife. But you can see from these clips that you're going to get the idea of what I'm getting at here. I need to keep knocking the straight edges off the spoon because the spoon is a fluid 3D object. It has probably not a flat surface on it, to be honest. And so I'm just getting rid of all of these facets on the spoon. Yep, you can see I jumped ahead quite a bit here. I had gone back to the draw knife and really removed a lot of that material, just hogged it off of there, as they say. And now I'm back with the carving knife to refine the shape even further. and remove as many facets as I can to try to get a round object. The more you can do with a knife or any sort of hand tool, bladed hand tool, the faster the sanding process will go, the faster this finishing will go. Because if you can get rid of as many facets as you can, it will take a lot less time with the sandpaper. And that's sort of what you're looking for. I know it looks like I'm being really aggressive with this knife, and I am actually, but that was because the wood had a run out in it, meaning that it had split closer to the end of the handle, and I needed to carve that out in order to get rid of that split. Otherwise it was always going to be like a spot on the spoon that would have maybe splinter out over time, or if it got wet it would stand up straight and end up being a rough spot. So I needed to remove that. Here you can see I'm switching to sandpaper. I'm using 150 grit to do kind of a rough end. I don't want to go too rough because it leaves, streaks and lines and sanding marks all over the piece of wood, and especially poplar, which is pretty soft. So I'm using 150 grit to kind of roughen the shape. And then I will be switching through to 220 grit and then to 400 grit eventually to finish. So if you've ever used sandpaper, you know what this process is like. If you haven't, you just slide it back and forth over the surface of the wood and it sands it smooth. I'm just doing a little bit of a shoe shine motion. That is one of the quickest ways to make something round with sandpaper, or continue to make it round, or make it more round, or refine the shape, or however you want to say it. But I'm just going to keep going back and forth over the spoon, looking for all of the rough spots, looking for all the facets that I didn't get. And yeah, you just keep doing and doing and doing that. I think the whole sanding process maybe took me 10 minutes. Because I got pretty close with the knives. And honestly, if you get very close with the knife and you like the hand-carved look, then just leave it. You don't need to go over it with sandpaper at all. You can just seal the spoon and use it the way it is. I switched to 220 grit because I was getting very close to having the spoon finished. And after the 220 I did 400 grit, but I didn't show that because it's just more of the same. Here we go. So the spoon is about finished. I'm going to seal it with some olive oil, and that'll be about that. Well, thanks for watching. If you liked the video, give it a like, comment, subscribe to my channel, please. And go out and learn some more about Dick Proenneke. He was quite the man, and a great inspiration for me in this journey of self-reliance. But until next time, thanks for watching. Happy carving.